Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a really old, really familiar story to find a lesson that feels surprisingly new. It's all about how we read and what we do with the insights we find along the way.
You know that feeling, right? You go back to a book or a movie, maybe a song you've heard 1,000 times, and all of a sudden one line just pops. It clicks in a way it never has before. It almost feels like a little secret was hidden in there, just waiting for you to find it.
Well, that exact thing happened to me not too long ago. I was re-listening to the book of Job, of all things, and an idea jumped out that kind of changes everything, not just how I see this one story, but maybe how we should approach reading anything we think is important. Okay, so this is the line that kicked the whole thing off. It's from Bildad, one of Job's friends who shows up to comfort him while he's suffering, and he tells Job, hey, look back to tradition, look at what our ancestors figured out. On the surface, that sounds like pretty solid advice, doesn't it?
Now, what's so interesting here is that Bildad's advice creates this powerful echo. You could call it a canonical resonance. When he says to look to the fathers, it immediately makes you think of the Psalms, the raw, emotional, super honest prayers and songs from guys like King David. So Bildad is actually pointing to a real source of wisdom, even if he's about to use it in a completely wrong way. And that brings us to Job's friends. We usually just write them off as being terrible at their job of comforting him, but it's so much deeper than that. They actually represent these timeless, flawed ways of thinking. They're like archetypes for how we can misuse wisdom.
So first up, you have Eliphaz. He's the voice of personal experience. His whole argument is basically, look, I've been around the block, I've seen some things, and from what I've seen, good people don't suffer like this. So you must have done something wrong. Then you've got Bildad, the guy we just heard from. He represents tradition. His argument is, hey, history teaches us that bad things happen to bad people. Just look at what the ancestors taught. He's leaning entirely on what's been handed down. And finally, there's Zophar. He's the voice of rigid dogma. He pretty much says, you think this is bad, you probably deserve even worse. The rules are the rules, and God's justice is way stricter than you can even imagine. So right there, you have these three classic but deeply flawed ways of seeing the world. Wisdom from your own experience, wisdom from tradition, and wisdom from a rigid set of rules. The problem is, each one takes a little piece of the truth and acts like it's the whole picture. And here's the ultimate irony, the big twist at the end of the story. After all their airtight arguments and their perfect systems, God finally shows up and says to the friends, you guys got it all wrong. Job, the one who was messy and angry and confused but was totally honest, he's the one who spoke rightly about me. Okay, so seeing the story this way brings up a really fascinating question about what we do when we get an insight. We have this temptation to take that little spark of an idea and canonize it. But what does that word even mean here? It's a weird question, I know. I mean, the book of Job is already in the biblical canon. We're not talking about adding new books to the Bible or anything. So we must be talking about a totally different way of using that word canonize. And all the confusion starts to clear up when you realize there are two very different ways we use this word. One is the official historical meaning, and the other is something we do in our own heads, almost like a personal habit. So first, the official definition. The word canon literally just means a rule or a measuring rod. So the biblical canon is the set of books that the church, over a long history, recognized as the authoritative standard, the measuring stick, for faith and life. It's a fixed thing. But then there's this second, much more subtle way that we canonize things all the time, probably without even realizing it. It's this mental habit of taking a personal insight, our aha moment, and turning it into a universal, binding rule that has to apply to everybody. And this, right here, is the absolute key. The biblical canon is meant to be a measuring rod, a tool to help us understand reality. But this other kind of personal canonizing turns our little insight into a gavel. It becomes a weapon to judge other people and to enforce our own take as the only right one. Understanding this difference shows us a huge danger in how we read. See, the mistake Job's friends made wasn't that their ideas were totally wrong. They all contained a grain of truth. The mistake was what they did with them. They turned their insights into rigid, unbreakable rules. Here's their three-step process. First, they take a generally true idea, like God is just. Okay. Second, they freeze that idea into an inflexible system. Therefore, suffering must always be a direct punishment for sin.
And third, they judge Job's actual, messy reality against their perfect system. And since it doesn't fit, they decide Job has to be the problem.
And we do this all the time. It has a certain sound to it. It sounds like, no, this is what this passage really means. Or if you don't see this connection, you're just not getting it. Or the most dangerous one of all. God revealed this to me personally, so it has a special authority. We take our observation and turn it into everyone else's obligation. And this isn't a new problem. Jesus himself called people out for doing this very thing. He told them, "You search the scriptures so carefully because you think they will give you eternal life, but you refuse to come to me to get it." They were using the text as a weapon, instead of listening to what it was actually saying. So the huge lesson from the book of Job seems to be this. The goal of reading isn't to decode the text to create a perfect little system that we can then use to legislate reality for everybody else. The healthiest way, the most faithful way, is just to listen, to notice, to sit with the text and let it meet you where you are, just like Job. And that leaves us with a final question to think about. When you pick up a text, any text you consider important, are you reading it to find rules to control reality and put everyone in their proper box? Or are you reading to connect with the life and the truth that it's pointing to? Because that difference, well, it's everything.